The funeral began with a round of applause. No one understood why. When the casket was lowered, the string quartet played "What a Wonderful World," a melody so cheerful it felt like a cruel joke. Standing in the front row, Eleanor Grant's black-gloved hands trembled slightly on the rim of her mourning hat. Never in her life had she seen a funeral organized like a branding celebration, yet her daughter-in-law, Melissa, had turned it into exactly that. Inside the lavish downtown Seattle Memorial Hall, rows of white orchids lined the walls, and a tribute video played on a large screen with grand music swelling in the background. Under the soft yellow lights, people smiled, politely whispered, and exchanged business cards. They talked about the company, not about Henry, the man lying still inside that mahogany coffin, and how he had lived his life. Eleanor could clearly hear the steady click of Melissa's heels on the marble floor. She walked up to the microphone, her voice sweet and polished, as if addressing a charity gala. "We're not here to cry," Melissa said, her lips curved into a professional smile. "We're here to celebrate the remarkable journey of Henry Grant. The man who taught me that legacy lies not in tears, but in vision." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She and Henry had built everything together: the construction firm, the foundation, the mansion on Queen Anne Hill. But in Melissa's speech, her late husband had been reduced to nothing more than the man who taught her how to expand her power. From the second row, her son David sat silently, eyes lowered, unable to meet his mother's gaze. When the ceremony ended, Eleanor remained alone. Everyone else had left, leaving only the faint sound of wind brushing the glass windows. She looked up at the enlarged photo of Henry, his kind face and bright eyes, reminding her of those mornings they used to drink coffee together in the garden. "You would have hated this, Henry," she whispered. Then came the click of heels again. Melissa appeared, phone in hand, a thin smile on her lips. "Mother, everything went beautifully, didn't it? The press will have their stories by morning. I think Henry would be proud." Eleanor didn't answer. She simply looked at her daughter-in-law in her fitted black dress, her neatly styled blonde hair, her face untouched by fatigue. "Proud," she said quietly. He despised anything fake. Melissa shrugged. "Times have changed, Mother. Feelings don't keep a company alive." She bent down to adjust a bouquet and continued lightly. "Next week, I'll be organizing the will meeting. Attorney Lanning has already arranged everything. You should attend, though. Honestly, it's not really necessary." Eleanor froze. "Not necessary. Yes," Melissa replied calmly. "Henry updated everything before he passed. I just want everyone to be informed." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically until the sound faded. Eleanor stood motionless for a long time until the lights in the hall shut off automatically, leaving only the dim glow reflected off the cold walls. Inside her chest, a chill spread slowly, heavy and sharp, as if the world had quietly erased her name. The next morning, the mansion on Queen Anne Hill was filled with the fading scent of wilted orchids. The housekeeper cleared away the funeral decorations, but no one asked if she needed anything. Melissa was busy with the media team. David had left early. Alone in the living room, Eleanor looked around the home she had lived in for more than 30 years, and every object seemed to no longer belong to her. On the table sat Henry's coffee cup, the one he hadn't had the chance to drink from on the morning he died. She lifted it carefully and set it back down, afraid to disturb the thin layer of residue inside. She remembered his promise long ago: "I'll take care of you for the rest of your life." And he had kept that promise until Melissa arrived. That afternoon, David came home. He looked exhausted. His tie loosened his voice, hesitant. "Mom, don't misunderstand Melissa. She's just trying to follow the law." Eleanor gave a faint smile. "The law?" She buried my husband under music and camera flashes, and now she wants to bury me under paperwork." David lowered his head, unable to look at her. "Dad told me he trusted Melissa. I think he had his reasons." Reasons? Eleanor's voice caught in her throat. "Do you really think your father would leave me with nothing? He wasn't that kind of man." David had no reply. When he left, Eleanor remained seated, staring out the window as a light drizzle fell over Seattle. Outside, cars streamed across the Fremont Bridge, their red taillights reflecting in her eyes like streaks of blood. That night, the house was silent. She walked into Henry's study, where everything remained exactly as he had left it. Among the folders and pens, she noticed a small wooden box. Inside was a silver pen engraved with the initials HG, the gift Melissa had given that morning. But as she lifted it, the cap loosened and a small folded note slipped out. The handwriting was unmistakable, the lines shaky but clear. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Do not trust any will that doesn't have my signature beside your name." Eleanor clutched the note tightly, her heart pounding. Outside, the rain poured harder, drumming against the roof as she whispered, "You're still speaking to me, Henry, and I'll listen." The storm blurred the city beyond her window, but in Eleanor's eyes, a new fire had just been lit. The next morning, a thin mist covered the skies of Seattle. Eleanor woke after a sleepless night, the pale gray light seeping through the curtains like a cold reminder that the world continued to turn even when her heart had stopped. Henry's note lay quietly on the table, the folds worn the edges, damp from tears. At 9 o'clock, the phone rang. A young woman's voice came through the speaker, smooth and emotionless. "Good morning, Mrs. Grant. I'm calling from Mr. Lanning's office. The invitation for Mr. Henry Grant's will reading has been sent to your email. The meeting will take place Wednesday at 9 a.m. at our downtown office." Eleanor replied softly, then hung up. She opened her email. The message was from Melissa's office, not from the law firm. The subject line was simple, "Estate meeting confirmation required." There were no condolences, no kind words, only a date, a time, and an address, cold and sterile like a contract. On the day of the meeting, rain poured down in sheets. The glass tower of Lanning & Co. loomed high gleaming, built to make others feel small. Eleanor stepped into the lobby, her coat damp from the rain, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. The young receptionist looked up briefly, her gaze sliding over Eleanor before dropping to the computer again, offering the practiced half-smile of someone instructed not to be too polite. "Good morning, you're here for Mr. Henry Grant's estate meeting." "Yes," Eleanor answered quietly. "Room 15, 20th floor." The elevator stopped doors sliding open to reveal a long hallway with gray carpet-white walls and a heavy wooden door at the end. Eleanor could hear her heartbeat as her hand gripped the handle. Inside was a long conference table, leather chairs, and steaming cups of coffee. 7 men and women in suits sat waiting, their eyes turning toward her as she entered. At the head of the table sat Melissa, elegant and composed in a cream-colored suit, her blonde hair tied neatly back, her polite smile barely touching her face. "You're here, good," she said lightly. "Let's begin." No one offered Eleanor a seat, but she pulled one out herself and sat down. The chair was cold and set a little too far from the table, as if by design. Attorney Lanning opened a thick folder, his rough voice filling the room. According to the final will and testament of Mr. Henry Grant, all assets, including shares of Grant Engineering Real Estate Holdings and control of the charitable foundation, are to be transferred to the legal heir, Mrs. Melissa Grant. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Papers rustled faintly. A man at the far end frowned. "Excuse me, what about Mrs. Eleanor Grant's share?" Melissa looked up, her tone flat. Under the revised terms, she is no longer included in the asset distribution. This was a decision Henry made before his passing with full legal counsel from our firm. Lanning paused, his eyes scanning the papers. His brow furrowed and his shoulders shifted slightly. "That's strange," he muttered. "I distinctly remember that the earlier draft still listed Mrs. Grant among the personal beneficiaries. This change is highly irregular." Melissa gave a faint smile. Henry signed the updated version at home a few weeks before he passed. "I have witnesses." A young woman sitting behind her nodded, her expression blank, as if reciting something memorized. Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze stayed fixed on the bold line printed before her. No remaining distributions assigned to Eleanor Grant. Each word cut into her chest like a blade. A lifetime of love work and 30 years of devotion reduced to one sentence of denial. The air in the room was so cold she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, unexpectedly, Lanning gave a short, strange laugh that broke the silence like a static spark. "My apologies," he said, eyes still on the paper. "It's just a few technical details don't quite match Henry's usual signature pattern. I'll need to review the original copy." Melissa's expression tightened. "I'm sure there's no issue. My father-in-law was perfectly lucid when he signed. Let's focus on confirming the transfer, shall we?" "Of course," Lanning replied, his tone, even though his eyes flickered with a trace of suspicion. The meeting ended nearly an hour later. People stood gathering their documents. Melissa shook hands with each of them, her voice smooth and steady as ever. When she reached her mother-in-law, she paused. "I know this is difficult for you, but I promise I'll take care of everything. Henry told me you shouldn't have to worry about money anymore." Eleanor looked at her. "Not worry, right? You erased my name from my own life and tell me not to worry." "I'm only following his wishes," Melissa said, her smile thin as a thread. "Sometimes letting go is the best way to preserve beautiful memories." Eleanor walked out without another word. The elevator doors closed behind her, reflecting her pale, aged face in the steel mirror. Her skin was drawn, her expression weary, but in her eyes something had awakened, a glint of light, sharp and alive, like the flash of a blade in the dark. Outside, the rain still fell in white sheets. Eleanor pulled up her collar and stepped into the misty street, each step pressing her silent vow deeper into her heart. They could erase her name from their papers, but not from Henry's memory. And she, though alone, still held what they didn't know about the note hidden inside the silver pen, the trembling handwriting of the man she loved. It wasn't just a message. It was a key, and she would use it. That afternoon, Seattle lay under a cold rain. The wind swept through the bare maple trees, slapping heavy drops of water against the window panes. Eleanor stood inside the vast house, feeling the emptiness around her, expanding, swallowing her piece by piece. Every room echoed with ghosts of the past, the sound of Henry's laughter, his footsteps on the stairs, the faint hum of the music he used to play while reading the morning paper. Now all of it existed only in memory, distant and distorted, like a radio lost in static. On the ebony table beside the fireplace, Henry's silver pen rested neatly in place. Inside it, the small folded note with his trembling handwriting had become her only piece of evidence, fragile yet priceless. "Do not trust any will that doesn't have my signature beside your name." Henry had never written anything without purpose. He was a meticulous man. Every word in every contract had to be perfect. So if he had left this message, it meant he had sensed danger before he died. Eleanor sat down and opened her husband's filing cabinet. Folders, invoices, notebooks, personal letters, all arranged with the same precision Henry was known for. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages, afraid that if she touched them too roughly, the past might crumble to dust. In the deepest drawer behind a stack of old tax documents, she found a brown leather notebook with a frayed spine. Henry used to write everything in it, meeting notes, appointments, private thoughts. She opened it. The date at the top of one page read June, meeting with Melissa about the trust fund. Beneath it were a few hurried lines. She said the management rights need updating, pressed me to sign quickly before the deadline. I refused. Something feels off. Must tell Eleanor. Eleanor froze, a chill running down her spine. Henry had discovered something, but he never had the chance to tell her. She turned a few more pages and found another note written weeks later. Attorney Pierce will understand if something happens. I trust him. She remembered Edward Pierce Henry's old friend, a retired independent lawyer living in the northern suburbs. The last time they had seen each other was at the company's 20th anniversary party. Edward had joked that Henry always trusted the people he loved a little too much. Now that line sounded less like humor and more like a warning that had been ignored. Eleanor grabbed her coat and car keys. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a damp mist hanging over the road. Edward's house sat nestled behind a row of tall pines, its roof covered in moss smoke, rising gently from the chimney, a sign of warmth in the middle of a gray winter. He opened the door as soon as he saw her, his gray eyes widening in surprise before softening. Eleanor. My goodness, you're soaked. Come in. She sat in the armchair near the fireplace, the heat warming her face. Without small talk, she took out the folded note and the brown notebook, placing them on the table. Edward, I need your help. Henry left these for me, and something is very wrong with the new will Melissa presented. He put on his glasses and read carefully, page by page. Each time he turned one, his frown deepened. This is Henry's handwriting, no doubt about it. And if I recall correctly, the will I helped him draft 3 years ago is still legally valid. That one definitely included your name, Eleanor. But at the meeting, they presented a different version. My name was gone. Melissa said Henry resigned it. Edward leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Impossible. He always said he would split the assets, half to you, half to the foundation. Someone must have interfered during the revision process. His gaze sharpened. Do you have any copies or other documents? Only this notebook and the note. Everything else Henry kept in the company office, and now Melissa controls it all. Then we'll have to find what she hasn't erased yet, Edward said firmly, his tone hardening like a soldier returning to the front line. I'll check the county's notarized document registry. If the old will exists, it will have a timestamp and an archival code. Eleanor looked at him, a thin thread of hope tightening in her chest. Do you really think we can prove it? Not just prove it. If there's fraud, Melissa will face the court. When Eleanor left Edward's house, the sky had turned a deep shade of violet. She stopped her car by Green Lake, where Henry used to take her on quiet Sunday walks. The surface of the water was still and smooth as glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but no longer defeated. A wild duck glided across the lake, leaving ripples that spread gently outward. She remembered Henry once saying, "Truth is like water. No matter how stirred or muddied, it always clears again." She smiled faintly, the first real smile in weeks. Back home, Eleanor placed the leather notebook on her desk and turned on the lamp. She carefully copied every line of Henry's writing into a separate file. The silver pen lay beside her, gleaming under the light. Somewhere deep inside, she felt as if Henry was still there, watching her, nodding quietly in approval. That night, when the clock struck midnight, the rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the windows. But this time, Eleanor didn't feel cold. She knew she had just opened the first door to the truth, and once opened, nothing would ever make her stop. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the dew-covered branches and glimmered on the kitchen window of Eleanor's house. She sat at the dining table, her cup of tea gone cold eyes fixed on the brown leather notebook. Every word Henry had written seemed to whisper to her, reminding her that he had once suspected something, feared something she hadn't seen in time. The shrill ring of the phone broke the silence. "Eleanor, it's Edward." His gravelly voice carried a note of urgency. "I checked the notarized archives for King County. There are 2 wills under Henry's name, one original witnessed by me, and another filed 6 months later by a different firm. But here's what's strange. The new one was submitted from the company's IP address, not from his home, and the electronic signature doesn't match the one Henry used. We need to meet." 30 minutes later, Eleanor arrived at a small cafe at the base of Capitol Hill. Edward was already there, wrapped in a heavy coat, a thick folder laid out in front of him. He slid the top page toward her. "Look, this is the signature from the original document, and this one is from the version Melissa filed. Same name, same date, but the handwriting is completely different." Eleanor leaned closer, her heartbeat quickening. The new signature was stiff, missing the natural breaks and flowing rhythm of Henry's hand. "Are you sure? I've been doing this for 40 years, Edward said. "I know a forged signature when I see one, but we'll need additional proof before we can make a legal claim. Either Henry was coerced into signing or someone forged it entirely. I think we should find someone who worked with him during that time, someone who might know what really happened." Eleanor stayed silent for a moment, then said slowly, "There is someone. Nora. She used to be Henry's administrative assistant at the company. An honest girl. I trust her. But after Melissa took over, Nora was reassigned." Edward nodded. "Then let's talk to her. If she knows anything, she could be the missing link." That afternoon, Eleanor went to the Grant Engineering headquarters. The place that had once been Henry's world looked entirely different now, cold, polished, and soulless. The glass doors reflected her image in her worn gray coat, small and faded among the young, fast-moving employees. She approached the receptionist. "I'd like to see Miss Nora Willis from administration." The receptionist blinked uncertainly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell her Henry Grant's wife is here. She'll understand." 10 minutes later, Nora appeared. She was still the same slender girl with hurriedly tied brown hair, but her eyes were tense. They found a nearby cafe to talk. Nora sat across from Eleanor, her hands clasped tightly together, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Grant. I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again. Things have changed so much since Mr. Henry passed. Every document, every record is under Mrs. Melissa's control. No one dares ask questions." Eleanor met her gaze. "Tell me what happened before Henry died. Did you see him sign another will?" Nora shook her head, then lowered her eyes. "I didn't see it directly. But I remember that evening Friday around 8. Mr. Henry was still in the office looking exhausted. Mrs. Melissa came in carrying 2 folders. I was about to leave when I heard her say softly, 'Just sign here, Father. I'll handle the rest.' And then Eleanor's voice trembled. When I went back for my purse, the office door was closed, the lights still on. An hour later, when I returned to grab my phone, the room was dark. The folders were gone. The next morning, Mrs. Melissa brought an envelope to HR saying it contained Mr. Henry's documents for transfer to a new law firm. Eleanor's hands clenched tight. "Do you remember anyone else being there that night?" "There was a man with her," Nora said after a pause. Gray hair glasses, he looked like a lawyer. "I didn't catch his name, but he had a scanner and a mobile notary seal. I thought it was all official that Mr. Henry had authorized it. But now," her voice faltered, fear flickering in her eyes. Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand gently. "Thank you, Nora. You've helped me more than you know, but please don't mention this to anyone. Not yet. When Eleanor left the cafe, she took a deep breath. The pain and helplessness were still there, but beneath them, something else stirred a quiet surge of determination. She was no longer the fragile woman cast aside. She was the only one left guarding Henry's true legacy. That evening back home, she called Edward. "We have a witness." Nora heard Melissa bring the documents to the office that night with a man carrying a notary seal. "Can you check who was authorized to notarize signatures that day?" "Yes," Edward replied quickly. "I'll look up the official notary registry. If we find his name, we'll trace the trail." Eleanor turned to the window. The rain had stopped. A thin veil of mist hung over the city streetlights, reflecting off the wet pavement like shimmering traces of memories, not yet dry. Inside her mind, a plan was taking shape. Melissa had made the first move, but the next one would be hers. And this time, Eleanor would not fight with tears, but with the truth. 2 days later, Edward called again. His voice was low, but there was a spark of excitement in it. "Eleanor, I traced the list of notaries active that night. Only one person was registered to work after hours in that area, a man named Thomas Laird. I dug deeper and found out he used to collaborate with a small legal office temporarily managed by Melissa herself." Eleanor gripped the phone, her breath quickening. "So she hired someone to forge the signature." "We can't prove it yet, but it's very likely," Edward replied. "I also found evidence of a money transfer from Grant Engineering's subsidiary account to a company called Laird Consulting. The amount was around $80,000. It could have been a service payment." She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "We need stronger evidence." Edward agreed. "I have an old contact at City Hall. He can help us access the original notarization records, including the submission time and the device used for signing. If it matches the serial number of the scanner from the company office, then Melissa will have incriminated herself." After the call, Eleanor sat still. The afternoon light filtered through the curtain, dividing the room in two, one half dim and the other deep in shadow. She suddenly realized she was living between those halves, one side still the devoted wife of Henry, the other becoming his avenger. That evening, she sat in Henry's study, staring at an old family photograph, Henry, David, Melissa, and herself. Everyone was smiling. She remembered the day David had introduced Melissa to them. The young woman had been confident and sharp, immediately winning Henry's admiration. "That girl is smart. He had said she'll help our son rebuild the company." Eleanor had believed him had opened her heart to her, and now that same woman was erasing her name from her husband's legacy. Rain pattered softly against the window. Eleanor picked up a pen and began writing a list of things to do. At the top, she wrote, "Meet Nora again. Collect copies of internal emails." The next line read, "Check the subsidiary account September transfer." Then she paused before writing slowly, "Find Daniel. Daniel Brooks. Henry's closest friend on the former board of directors. Honest, direct, the kind of man who had once warned Henry that Melissa was manipulating financial decisions. But after Henry's death, Daniel had left the company, distancing himself from the chaos. If anyone still knew the truth, it would be him." The next morning, Eleanor visited the small architectural office where Daniel now worked. He looked surprised when he saw her. "Eleanor? I thought you'd left the city." She gave a faint smile. "I still have unfinished business." When she told him everything, Daniel sat quietly for a long time. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "I kept a few things when I left Grant Engineering. Internal statements and a transcript of the last board meeting Henry attended. He asked me about transferring ownership to Melissa. When I advised him to wait for the audit, he laughed and said, 'Melissa says it's urgent to protect the fund. I trust her.' And he died only weeks later," Eleanor whispered. Daniel nodded. I can't make accusations without proof, but if you're ready to fight, I'll stand with you. On her way home, cold winds swept down the hill toward the sea. Eleanor turned on the car heater, watching the rain slide across the windshield. The fear inside her was gone. The pieces were finally falling into place. Melissa, the fake notary, the suspicious transfer, and now Daniel, the second witness. She turned onto Lakeview Drive, pulled over, and called Edward. "We're almost there," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes blazing with determination. "This time, I won't let anyone else write my story for me." On Monday morning, fog blanketed the surface of Lake Union, and the sunlight broke through only as a faint, pale streak. Eleanor drove to Edward's office, both hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the glove compartment, Daniel's folder rested securely inside a leather case, as if she were carrying a weapon. Edward greeted her with a look that was both weary and tense. On his desk, piles of documents were neatly arranged. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I've spoken to my contact at City Hall. We've obtained the electronic copy of the will Melissa filed. It was scanned using an old Canon machine, the exact same model registered at Grant Engineering's office. They didn't file it through the law firm, but through the company's internal network." Eleanor froze. So she did everything inside Henry's office while he was still sick. Exactly. "And there's more," Edward said, pulling out another sheet of paper. "The system log shows the document was scanned at 10:45 p.m. on July 17th, a Sunday. The office was supposed to be closed that night under security protocol. But someone entered using Melissa Grant's access card." Eleanor stared at the printed line, feeling the blood in her veins turn cold. Every suspicion she had was now taking shape. Edward went on. "I also heard back from Thomas Laird. I asked him about that notarization night. His response was vague. He said he was authorized by the primary heir. When I pushed for a meeting, he hung up. We have to keep everything quiet for now. If Melissa finds out you're investigating, she'll move first." Eleanor nodded, her voice low but steady. "I spent half my life keeping this family together. I can spend the rest of it fighting for justice." That afternoon, she went to see Daniel. He was in his garage fixing an old car. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. News already, Eleanor told him everything. Daniel listened intently, his face growing more serious. "If all of this checks out, we'll need a digital forensics expert, someone who can prove the new will is a forgery. I know someone, Hal Givens, a legal data analyst. He worked with Henry on last year's tax project. He might have seen him near the end." The name made Eleanor pause. Henry mentioned Hal once. He said he was honest and dependable. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed. "Hal. It's Daniel Brooks. I've got something important concerning Henry Grant." The meeting was set for that evening at a small cafe near Fremont. Hal was a slender, middle-aged man with thick glasses and a measured way of speaking. After listening to Eleanor's account, he remained silent for a while before pulling a worn folder from his bag. "I still have my notes. Henry came to see me twice last July. The first time he asked how to make sure the trust fund couldn't be misused. The second time, he came with Melissa. But that time, he barely spoke. She did most of the talking. When I suggested an independent review, Henry just looked at me for a long moment and said, 'That's not necessary. Melissa will handle everything.'" Hal turned a few pages and handed them to Eleanor. "These are my notes. There's a line here that says, 'Unclear update on beneficiary should confirm with wife.'" Henry never followed up. A week later, Melissa called to say he no longer needed my services. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, so he knew something was wrong, but he was too weak to fight back. Hal nodded. "I can provide a sworn statement if needed. I'll also check our office computer logs. If Melissa sent any related documents, they'll still be on record." As they left the cafe, Eleanor paused under the awning, watching the rain begin to pour again. Daniel gently pulled her coat closer. Henry tried to protect you, he just ran out of time. Eleanor gave a sad smile. Now it's my turn to protect him. That night, back home, she placed Hal's folder on her desk. Every sheet of paper was a puzzle piece, each one bringing her closer to the truth. She opened her notebook and wrote the final line of the day. When they used a forged signature to bury my husband, a second time I will make them dig up every page. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the Seattle sky. In the old house, the desk lamp cast its warm glow over Eleanor's face, lighting her eyes until they shone like steel. Fear no longer lived there, only resolve and a promise to the man she had loved. She would not let his legacy become a stain in the hands of a traitor. 3 days later, the phone rang just as Eleanor was making tea. On the other end was Edward, his voice raspy but full of restrained excitement. "Good news," he said. Hal just confirmed the data. He found a copy of an email Melissa sent to the legal team 6 weeks before Henry passed. The subject line reads, "Revise trust, remove co-beneficiary privileges per our discussion." She explicitly ordered your name removed from the trust and even marked it as urgent, must be completed before the end of the month. The teacup in Eleanor's hand trembled. Did Henry ever see that email? No, Edward replied. According to the server logs, it was sent from his internal account, but the IP address traces back to Melissa's office. That means she logged into his computer. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. The puzzle pieces were finally fitting together, every layer of pretense falling away to reveal the cold truth about her daughter-in-law. "That's enough," she said quietly. "Can we take it to court now?" Edward exhaled. "Not yet. We have to follow procedure. If we file now, she'll claim you fabricated everything. I've contacted a specialist in estate fraud cases. Her name is Sophia Alvarado. She's known for winning family asset disputes. If she agrees, she'll represent you legally." That afternoon, Eleanor met Sophia at her office. The space was modest but organized, its walls lined with framed certificates. Sophia, a composed middle-aged woman with dark hair, shook Eleanor's hand firmly. "I've reviewed the documents Edward sent me," she said. "The irregularities are serious fake signatures after hours notarization emails sent from the victim's account. If we can verify each one, not only can we prove fraud, but we can also file for a temporary freeze on Melissa's assets to prevent her from moving anything." Eleanor looked her in the eye, her voice steady. "I don't care about the money. I just want the truth to be recorded correctly." Sophia smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That's exactly why you'll win." That night, Sophia and Edward stayed late preparing the lawsuit. They cross-checked every line of evidence, printed certified copies, and arranged the witnesses in order Nora, who overheard the conversation the night the will was signed, Daniel, Henry's former colleague on the board, Hal, the tax specialist, and the electronic logs that tied it all together. When they were done, Sophia placed her hand on the thick stack of papers. Once the court approves the temporary freeze, Melissa won't be able to touch the trust. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glowing with determination. "I want to be there when the documents are filed." 2 days later, they arrived together at the King County Courthouse. The air was cool and damp, the ground still slick from morning rain. Eleanor's steps were slow but firm. In the long hallway bathed in white light, she could feel her heartbeat steady and heavy like a drum. When Sophia signed the filing papers, the sharp scrape of the pen against paper sounded through the silence, a sound that echoed in Eleanor's mind like a formal declaration of war. By late afternoon, the temporary asset freeze was approved. Notices were sent to all relevant banks and notary offices, ordering an immediate hold on any transfers from the estate of Henry Grant. When the news arrived, Eleanor stood by the window watching as the city lights flickered on one by one. The glow reflected across Puget Sound like thousands of golden stars. In that moment, she saw Henry in her memory smiling softly in their old garden, his voice echoing gently, "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you." She smiled faintly and whispered into the empty room, "I heard you, Henry." A night breeze stirred, rustling the framed wedding photo on the shelf, and for the first time in months, Eleanor no longer felt alone. She knew the battle had only begun, but now the scales had started to tip toward justice. 3 days after the court approved the asset freeze, a white envelope appeared in Eleanor's mailbox. There was no return address, only a postmark from downtown Seattle. Inside was a neatly printed sheet of black text, cold and impersonal. "Mrs. Grant, we advise you to cease your current actions. All matters have been handled in accordance with the law. If you proceed further, we will file charges for defamation and unlawful interference with property. Sincerely, Sterling & Cohn, law firm legal representatives of Mrs. Melissa Grant." Eleanor read each word slowly, her lips pressed tightly together. The ink still smelled fresh, as if the letter had been printed that very morning. She placed it on the table, exhaled, then let out a quiet laugh. A laugh without any trace of joy. "She thinks she can scare me." That afternoon, Sophia and Edward came to her house. Both examined the letter. Sophia shrugged. A predictable move. When the other side starts to feel pressure, they resort to threats to test your reaction. Eleanor poured tea, her voice calm. "If she believes she can frighten me with paper and ink, she's forgotten that I've sat through nights in hospital rooms watching Henry fight for every breath. Nothing terrifies me more than losing the person I love." Edward smiled faintly. "Then we keep going." He pulled another envelope from his briefcase. "I just got a response from the company's former HR manager. The security footage from July 17th still exists the night Melissa scanned the will. The hard drive hadn't been wiped yet because the company is under audit. I've requested a copy for the court." Sophia nodded. "If the footage shows her in the office that night, we'll have visual evidence. She won't be able to deny it." Eleanor looked at the two of them and felt a small spark ignite inside her chest. But the flicker of hope was soon shadowed by concern. Melissa won't stay quiet. She's too clever not to fight back. And she was right. The next day, the counterattack came. A second letter was delivered directly to Sophia's office. It was longer, filled with accusations claiming that Eleanor exploited her age and emotions to damage her daughter-in-law's reputation, spread false information, and threaten the integrity of the Henry Grant Foundation. It ended with a demand for reputational compensation and a warning of a countersuit. After reading it, Sophia chuckled. When they start talking about reputation, it means they're already losing it. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a thick coat, watching the rain pour down into the garden. Each drop hit the wooden steps with a steady rhythm, like the calm heartbeat of someone who was simply waiting. She thought of Henry the way he used to hold her hand and say, "All lies eventually collapse. Your only job is to stand still until they do." The next morning, Sophia called with an update. The court received the video. It's not perfectly clear, but the figure and the timestamp match. Melissa left the office at 10:50 p.m. carrying a large folder. Her access card was used at that exact time. "I'll submit the footage along with the electronic log copies." Eleanor listened, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Henry didn't die in vain," she whispered. Later that day, another envelope arrived, this one with the official seal of the Henry Grant Foundation. Inside was an invitation to an event titled A Night of Tribute and Remembrance for Henry Grant, hosted by CEO Melissa Grant. It would be held at a luxury lakeside hotel with a guest list that included business partners, executives, and members of the press. Eleanor stared at the elegant card, the corners of her lips curling into a cold smile. She wants to keep performing her play. That evening, she called Edward and Sophia. "I want to be there," she said. "Not to cause a scene, just to be present." Sophia hesitated. "Are you sure that will be her stage?" Eleanor's tone was quiet but steady, almost icy. "That's exactly why I have to step onto it. She needs to know the show isn't over." The next morning, she opened her wardrobe and chose an old but refined navy suit, the one Henry had given her for their 30th wedding anniversary. She pinned a small silver brooch engraved with his name to her lapel. In the mirror, a 62-year-old woman stared back, silver in her hairlines on her face, but eyes sharp and clear as steel. She clenched the invitation in her hand. Outside, the sky was still gray with rain, but this time Eleanor walked out without hesitation, without lowering her head. She went carrying with her the calm strength of someone who knew she had nothing left to lose except the truth. On Saturday night, the wind from the lake carried the damp scent of water, mixed with the fragrance of white lilies. Outside the Grand Horizon Hotel, a line of luxury cars stretched along the entrance headlights, sweeping across the marble steps like flashes of lightning. A grand banner hung over the doorway, its gold letters gleaming, "Henry Grant Memorial Gala, a legacy that lives on." Beneath it was the logo of the charity foundation Henry had built now, fully in Melissa's control. Eleanor stood alone on the steps, dressed in her navy suit, the silver brooch on her chest glinting under the lights. She drew in a deep breath, the smell of perfume and exhaust fumes merging heavily in the air like memories pressing down on her. The doorman bowed politely. "Good evening, ma'am. The event is about to begin." Inside, the ballroom dazzled with opulence. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across sequined gowns, glasses of wine and polished smiles. At the center of the room stood an enlarged portrait of Henry on a gilded pedestal beneath it, a plaque that read, "A man of vision and compassion." But Eleanor knew this evening wasn't about remembrance. It was about control, about Melissa taking center stage under Henry's name. Melissa emerged from the crowd in a sleek black gown, a string of pearls draped around her neck. She paused when she saw Eleanor, a cold smile flickering on her lips. "Mother, you came. I wasn't sure you'd want to appear given the recent misunderstandings." "I didn't come to misunderstand," Eleanor replied, her voice low and steady. "I came to hear what you intend to say about my husband." "Only good things," Mother Melissa said sweetly, tilting her head with that familiar, calculated grace. "Henry would have wanted tonight to be perfect, and so do I." Eleanor said nothing. She walked past her and stepped further into the room where guests murmured in clusters. Some recognized her, offering polite nods, tinged with awkwardness and pity. They had heard the story, or at least Melissa's version of it, the grieving widow overcome with emotion who didn't understand the legal complexities. As the lights dimmed and the music softened, Melissa took the stage. Her voice rang smooth and practiced. "We gather tonight not only to remember Henry Grant, the founder, the father, the devoted husband, but to carry forward his vision. He believed legacy wasn't measured by wealth, but by trust and innovation." Applause rippled faintly through the crowd. She paused for effect, then continued. "I am deeply honored that Henry entrusted me with leadership, allowing me to guide this foundation in his name. And with the blessing of the family, I will protect his values with all my strength." Eleanor felt heat rush to her face. The blessing of the family. She was lying right there before hundreds of people, before partners who had once dined in her home. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't move. Not yet. Not here. The evening continued with wine jazz music and hollow words of praise. Eleanor drifted quietly along the display tables labeled Henry's favorite items. She stopped cold when she saw a worn brown leather notebook, Henry's notebook. She recognized the scuffs on its corners, the ink marks on the cover. A small plaque beside it read, "Donated by CEO Melissa Grant." Anger flared through her chest. "Donated," she whispered. "That was his private journal." A middle-aged man approached. "Mrs. Grant," he said kindly. "James Collins. I worked with Henry. I'm sorry we haven't met sooner. I thought you were still overseeing the foundation." Eleanor turned to him startled. "Overseeing, no. I was removed from the board." James frowned. "That's strange. 2 months ago, Henry emailed me saying he wanted you and Melissa to co-manage it. I still have that email. Could you send me a copy?" Eleanor asked quickly, her voice shaking just slightly. "Of course," he said, still looking puzzled. "I'll forward it tonight." She thanked him and stepped back. The ballroom seemed to spin around her. Henry had wanted her to share leadership, but that message had vanished from every official record. Melissa had erased it just as she had erased Eleanor from everything else. She stepped out onto the balcony to breathe. The air was sharp and cold, but it cleared her mind. Down below, cars glided past the gates. Through the faint echo of music behind her, she heard Henry's voice in her memory. "When they twist, the truth. Don't raise your voice. Bring in the light." Eleanor nodded gently. When she turned back inside, she met Melissa's gaze across the room. The woman was still smiling, but now the smile faltered. Perhaps she had finally realized the woman she thought would stay silent forever had just returned. Late that night, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Eleanor left the hotel alone. She checked her phone. An email notification glowed on the screen. From James Collins. Attached was a file titled, "Subject Joint Trustee Confirmation Henry Grant." The first line, written by Henry himself, read, "I confirm my intent for Eleanor Grant to remain co-trustee and co-manager of all funds under the Henry Grant Foundation." She read it over and over, tears filling her eyes, but not from sorrow. These were tears of vindication. It was the proof she needed, proof that Henry had never intended to exclude her. Back home, she turned on the light and laid out all the evidence on the table, the note hidden in the silver pen, the old leather journal Nora's statement, Edward's data, Hal's testimony, and now James's email. Together they formed a single, undeniable chain. Eleanor sat down and began writing on the first page of a new file, counterclaim and motion for restoration of co-trustee position estate of Henry Grant. Outside, the rain began to fall again, but in the quiet room, the desk lamp glowed across her face, bright, steady, unyielding. She was no longer the widow erased from her husband's legacy. She was the keeper of truth. And tonight's grand memorial would be the last evening Melissa Grant ever spent inside her own lies. The next morning, the city was still wrapped in a thin layer of mist. Eleanor woke earlier than usual. She brewed a pot of black coffee and sat by the window, gazing out at the damp garden. Dewdrops clung to the leaves, glinting like tiny pieces of metal. Inside her chest was a feeling both calm and burning, like a flame that had been hidden for months now. Quietly alight, not raging but bright enough to guide her forward. At 8 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Edward. "Eleanor, I've reviewed the email Henry sent to James. It's the golden piece of evidence. The signature is authentic. The verification code matches his old company account. I've already sent it to Sophia." She's preparing an extended filing requesting the court to reinstate your co-trustee position and investigate Melissa for forgery. How soon can we file? Eleanor asked. This afternoon, Edward replied. Sophia wants you present since the media is beginning to circle. A few financial reporters have caught wind of the dispute at the Henry Grant Foundation. Eleanor nodded quietly. She looked around the house, every corner. Every object seemed to have returned to its rightful place. The framed photos of Henry the books he never finished the armchair where he used to sit each night. Everything was still yet alive. That afternoon, the King County Courthouse was unusually crowded. Sophia entered with composed confidence, arranging the thick stack of documents before the clerk. We request that the court open a formal investigation into the forgery and breach of trust involving the updated will of Henry Grant. Furthermore, we ask for the reinstatement of Mrs. Eleanor Grant's co-trustee rights as confirmed in the final verified email from the deceased. The room fell silent. A few reporters whispered camera shutters clicking in quick succession. When they stepped outside, Eleanor saw Melissa waiting near the courthouse steps. She was dressed in a pristine white dress, her smile flawless as always, but her eyes were different, cold and sharp as a blade. Impressive. Mother Melissa said, her voice low but cutting. You really want to turn a private family matter into a public spectacle. Eleanor's voice remained calm, her eyes unwavering. I haven't turned anything into a spectacle. You did that the moment you turned Henry's legacy into a performance. I'm only protecting what's mine. Melissa snapped her voice, trembling with anger. He trusted me. It's what he wanted. No, Eleanor said softly. He trusted you to be honest. And you chose betrayal. Melissa let out a small brittle laugh, though her eyes flickered. You have no proof. I do, Eleanor said, her tone sharp as steel. An old friend of Henry's just sent me his final email confirming my role as co-trustee. And you know what the saddest part is? Melissa Henry still believed in you until the very end. He never imagined you'd be capable of something like this. Melissa stepped back, her smile fading. She said nothing more, only turned and walked away, her heels striking the stone steps like hollow echoes. Later that afternoon back home, Eleanor received a call from Sophia. The court has approved the preliminary investigation. We've been granted access to request full backups of all foundation emails and data. More importantly, Melissa's administrative rights have been suspended until the case is resolved. Eleanor sank into her chair, gripping the phone tightly. Thank you, Sophia. But I don't want a long, bitter fight. I just want the truth made public. You'll have that, Sophia said, because this time, the law is on your side. That night, Eleanor opened her window, letting the cool night breeze sweep through the room. The scent of rain and pine drifted in from the garden. She gathered her documents, sorted them, numbered each page carefully. On the final page, she wrote a single line. If the truth is buried, it will bloom where the earth cracks open. The next morning, the news exploded. The front page of the Seattle Journal blared the headline, Henry Grant Foundation, under legal scrutiny, widow claims forged will. Beside it was Melissa's photo captioned, CEO declines to comment. Eleanor's phone rang endlessly. Friends, Henry's former colleagues, and even strangers sent messages of support. One note read, We always knew Henry wasn't the kind of man to cut his wife out of his legacy. Eleanor read each message, her chest swelling with emotion she couldn't name. Henry had once told her, when the truth finally breaks through, it spreads like light unstoppable. Now she understood. That afternoon, Edward called again, his voice steady and warm. She's made her move. Melissa just filed for indefinite leave from the foundation, citing mental health reasons. Looks like she knows this is out of her hands. Eleanor didn't reply immediately. She looked out the window where the late sun cast golden light across the garden. "Edward," she said softly after a moment. "Henry once told me the last light he wanted to see in this world was honest light. I think today he got it." As night settled and the city grew quiet, Eleanor turned off the lights, leaving only a single candle burning on her desk. Its flame flickered across the documents, illuminating Henry's signature and her calm, resolute face. The legal battle wasn't over, but the war within her heart was. She didn't seek revenge. She only wanted the world to know that Henry Grant, the man she had loved, the man so many misunderstood, had never betrayed her. And with that, justice had finally begun to find its way home. A week later, the sky over Seattle was brighter than usual. The fog lifted quickly, revealing streaks of golden sunlight slipping through the trees. Eleanor woke to the familiar sounds of the city, the hum of the streetcars, the toll of church bells, the rhythmic steps of someone jogging past. Everything seemed ordinary, yet to her nothing was the same. The weight on her chest had finally begun to lift. The newspapers continued to report on the case. Financial outlets buzzed about the resilient widow fighting the falsification of a multi-million-dollar estate. Some commentators called her a symbol of quiet justice. Sophia sent her a news clipping noting that public opinion was now clearly in their favor. "People love those who rise after being underestimated," she wrote. But at the same time, Melissa had begun her silent counterattack. Eleanor received anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Brief silence, then the line would go dead. Once a wilted bouquet appeared on her porch, accompanied by a blank white card with just 2 words, "Enough already." Eleanor looked at it, not frightened, only sad for a woman who Henry had once trusted completely, who had everything yet chose to walk into the shadows. On the 4th day after the filing was made public, Sophia called. "Eleanor, the court has approved our request to summon witnesses. They'll be questioning Thomas Laird, the notary who certified the forged will. The deposition is this Friday. Do you want to attend?" "Of course," Eleanor replied. "I need to look him in the eye when he tells the truth." That morning, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashing like lightning. Melissa was absent, represented instead by a gray-haired lawyer whose dry voice made the proceedings sound routine. In the front row, Edward and Sophia sat quietly beside Eleanor. When Thomas Laird was called, he walked slowly, eyes downcast. Under Sophia's calm but firm questioning, he began to falter. "Did you personally witness Henry Grant signing the will I was told he had already signed when I arrived? Who told you that, Mrs. Melissa Grant? So you notarized a signature without the signer present?" Thomas swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was assured the procedure was legal." Sophia paused, then said clearly, "Were you aware that doing so is a violation of notary law?" The room went silent. He lowered his head. "Yes." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Sophia lifted another document. "This is the record of an $80,000 transfer into your account from a fund managed by Mrs. Melissa Grant just 2 days after the will was revised. How do you explain that?" Thomas went pale. He glanced around, his voice shrinking. I can't say more. I was told to stay silent." By whom? Sophia's voice was sharp and cold. He hesitated, then whispered, "Mrs. Melissa Grant." The room erupted. Reporters rushed for the hallway phones already dialing. Eleanor sat still, her hands clasped tightly together. There was no joy or triumph in her face, only a quiet ache. Henry had trusted that woman like a daughter, and now the truth stood exposed, cruel and undeniable. The hearing ended at noon. Outside, reporters swarmed around her. "Mrs. Grant, how do you feel now that Mr. Laird has confessed?" Eleanor stopped, looked straight into a camera, and said calmly, "I'm not fighting for money. I'm fighting to give a voice back to someone who can no longer defend himself." That afternoon, the story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with the tag "Justice for Henry Grant," and online communities called her the woman who stood against the dark. Sophia smiled when she called later, "Justice has more ways to exist now than we ever imagined." But that night alone in her study, Eleanor still didn't feel at peace. She sat under the soft light of the desk lamp, flipping through the stack of documents. Each rustle of paper sounded like a whisper. In her mind, she saw Henry again, the way he looked in his final days, thinner, his hand still gripping hers in the hospital. "I only worry about one thing he had said, that when I'm gone, you won't have a place in this world anymore." She smiled sadly. "You were wrong, Henry. I'm still here, and I'm still exactly where I belong, by your side." The next morning, Sophia brought news. The court is considering filing civil charges against Melissa for fraud and manipulation of the estate, but she might choose to settle before it goes that far. "Settle?" Eleanor asked. "Yes. If she signs a formal withdrawal from the foundation, admits the will was falsified, and restores your name to the inheritance, the court might halt prosecution." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, then said softly, "If she chooses that path, I'll agree. Not because I forgive her, but because I won't let Henry's legacy be tainted by hatred." 3 days later, Melissa's attorney sent over the official settlement. Melissa agreed to resign entirely from the Henry Grant Foundation, transfer all management authority back to the founding board, and issue a public apology for errors made during her tenure. Eleanor read the document slowly, then folded it neatly. She felt no joy, no anger, only a quiet stillness spreading through her. The truth had spoken at last, without shouting, without vengeance. That evening she visited Henry's grave. The cemetery rested on a hillside wind, sweeping through the maple trees. She placed a bouquet of lavender before the headstone and sat down, speaking softly as if he were still there. "They've stopped fighting now, Henry. Everything's been set right. No one will rewrite your story again." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of lavender and wet earth. She looked up at the sky where the sunset burned crimson across the clouds. A small sparrow landed nearby, pecked the ground, once then fluttered away. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. "Maybe that's you telling me it's time to rest." She stayed there a while longer until the last light disappeared. Then she rose her coat, brushing in the wind, and walked away quietly, gracefully, like someone who had just closed a painful chapter and stepped into another where peace was finally waiting. A month later, spring arrived in Seattle. The trees along the lake began to sprout tender green buds, and the air carried the fresh scent of earth after rain. Eleanor sat by the window with a cup of hot tea in her hands, the soft morning light falling across her silver hair. On the table lay the closed case file, the corner stamped clearly with the court seal, "Case closed." Co-trusteeship of the Henry Grant estate reinstated. She didn't need to read any further. Everything that needed to be heard had been heard. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Now silence itself was the greatest reward. That afternoon, Eleanor returned to the headquarters of the Henry Grant Foundation for the first time in months. The glass building still gleamed in the sunlight, but the air inside no longer felt heavy. The original board members greeted her with genuine smiles. "We're so glad to have you back," one of them said. Henry would be proud. She nodded, walking down the hallway until she stopped before a wall filled with photos of Henry, him smiling among scholarship students, planting trees in a community garden. She touched the glass lightly and whispered, "We're back where we belong, Henry." She joined the board meeting, but didn't dwell on the past. Instead, she proposed a new scholarship called the Second Light, dedicated to those who had once been overlooked but still found the courage to rise again. The room went quiet for a few seconds, then filled with approving nods. Someone said softly, "That's exactly what Henry would have done." When the meeting ended, Eleanor stepped outside. The late afternoon sun bathed the street in gold. She paused by the lavender garden near the entrance, the same plants Henry had planted in the foundation's first year. The familiar scent stung her eyes, but this time there were no tears. That night in her small home, she opened the window and placed Henry's photo on the table. The candlelight flickered, reflecting his gentle smile and steady eyes. "You see, don't you?" she whispered. "Everything continues, not through anger, but through faith." Outside, the spring breeze rustled through the maple trees, carrying the soft hum of a city moving into a new season. Eleanor smiled, closed Henry's final notebook, and rested her hand on its cover for a long moment. She knew she had nothing left to prove. True legacy was never measured in wealth. It lived in the courage to stand up and hold on to the truth. And if someone hearing this story has ever felt erased from their own life, Eleanor would tell you this: stand up. Claim your voice again. Because justice doesn't always echo through the sound of a gavel. It sometimes speaks through the quiet persistence of the heart. And if this story has touched you, share your thoughts. In the comments, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from. Because everyone has a legacy, the truth we choose to protect.